She offered him coffee every morning for 3 months. She never knew who he was. Listen, K-fam, stay with me because this one is going to rearrange something in your brain. Tiffany Lynn is a 26-year-old Black woman, beautiful, precise executive secretary at one of the most powerful luxury conglomerates in Manhattan. She's been working there for 2 years. She knows the contracts, the clients, the corridors. She knows her boss, Kang Do-yoon, Korean, 37, successful businessman, rumored to be the head of one of the most dangerous networks on the East Coast, exists somewhere on the 40th floor, behind a calendar system and a chain of official documents. They have spoken one time, in 2 years. She's been leaving notes in the margins of his reports for 8 months. Little provocations. Corrections he never responds to. Every morning she corrects his work. Every morning he reads it. And neither of them says a word. So when a new janitor started showing up on her floor, a man named Mr. Park, gray uniform, cap pulled low glasses, pushing a cleaning cart, she offered him coffee the way she offers everyone coffee. Without ceremony, without looking twice, because that's who she is. The woman who sees the person in the uniform, AU, K-fam, she had no idea, not a single idea. For 3 months, every afternoon, she sat in that corridor and talked to Mr. Park about her life, her frustrations, her work, and about the boss she couldn't stop thinking about. She told him everything, and the man listening was the boss. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. The folder came back wrong. Not wrong in an obvious way, not missing pages, not scrambled. Wrong in the way only Tiffany Lynn would notice because Tiffany Lynn had memorized the correct version when she filed it 3 days ago. Clause 14.3 had a transposition, a small one. The kind of error that slips past 3 rounds of legal review and lands in a signature package like a splinter in fine wood, nearly invisible, capable of real damage. She pulled the contract out of the distribution folder, uncapped a red pen, circled the number twice, and wrote in the margin in her cleanest hand, corrected the transposition on clause 14.3. Again, you're welcome and you owe me either dinner or an apology. I'll accept either. TL. She put the corrected document in the revised package and sent it to the boardroom before 7:50 a.m., 40 minutes before the first board member would arrive. Then she poured herself the second coffee of the morning, sat back down at her desk, and returned to the 8 other things she needed to finish before 9 o'clock. Listen, K-fam, let me paint you the picture for a second. This woman arrives at 7:45 every single morning, before the receptionist, before the assistants, before the security rotation changes. She does this because she has figured out that the 45 minutes before this building breathes are the 45 minutes when she can actually think. She has been doing this for 2 years. She has left 11 margin notes in 11 different reports over 8 months. She has never received a response to a single one, and she keeps leaving them. That detail right there, that's the whole story, girl. That is the whole story. The 38th floor of Kang Imperial Group's Manhattan Tower had the specific kind of quiet that comes from expensive materials absorbing sound. Marble floors that didn't echo, glass walls that didn't rattle. The overhead lighting was recessed and warm, the kind that flattered everyone equally, a detail the building's interior designer had probably been proud of and that Tiffany had never once thought about, because she had more important things to think about. Her desk was positioned so that her back was not to the door. She had rearranged it herself 2 weeks after starting without asking anyone, and from her chair she had a clear line of sight to both the elevator bank and the corridor that led to the 40th floor executive suite. The executive suite where Kang Do-hyun worked. She had met him formally once in her first week. A handshake, a welcome to the firm, and then nothing, which is to say, everything conducted through the precise machinery of emails, distribution folders, calendar requests, and occasional audio messages that his assistant Chun forwarded to her from the 40th floor. She had transcribed 4 of those audio messages. She knew his voice better than she knew her own brother's at this point, which was a thought she didn't indulge often. The things she knew about him from 2 years of proximity without proximity. He read documents in the order she filed them, which meant he had at least looked at her margin notes. He did not make changes to corrected work without a routing notes explaining the change. He did not miss board meetings. He did not speak at board meetings unless the room had gone wrong in some way only he seemed to detect, at which point he would say one sentence, flat, not loud, and the conversation would recalibrate. She had listened to 3 recordings of board sessions in order to take minutes, and she had noticed this pattern all 3 times. What she knew about herself, she was thinking about him too much for it to be purely professional. She was furious at herself for it, in the contained and functional way of someone who has recognized a problem and is managing it rather than solving it. It was not going to be solved. The man was her employer. He operated in a world whose edges she had glimpsed enough to understand she should not look at directly, and he communicated with her exclusively through the medium of official documents and a calendar system that his assistant managed. There was nothing to act on. There was no action available, so she left margin notes. It was the closest she could get to speaking to him without speaking to him, and it had the additional virtue of being technically work-related. If anyone ever asked, she was simply annotating corrections, which she was. She finished the quarterly summary by 8:15. She was revising the vendor list by 8:30 when Rosa Delgado appeared at the kitchenette doorway, still in her coat, holding a paper coffee cup that suggested she had not trusted the building's coffee this morning. "You've been here since the dawn of time again," Rosa said. "Since 7:45, which is the same thing." Rosa came to the kitchenette counter, set her cup down, and looked at Tiffany's desk with the specific expression she wore when she was deciding whether to say something. "Did you hear about the Mercer situation?" "The transfer. The very sudden transfer." Rosa's kept her voice light. "The man had been here 6 years. He was transferred to Sao Paulo in a week. I heard." Tiffany did not look up from the vendor list. "He had been coming to your desk a lot lately." Rosa said this in the same even tone, as if it were a scheduling observation. Tiffany looked up. "Are you trying to say something?" Rosa picked up her coffee cup. "I'm saying that Sao Paulo is very far away, and that it's cold in Manhattan right now, and I like having people to eat lunch with." She smiled, thin and deliberate. "That's all I'm saying." It was not all she was saying. But Tiffany understood, as she usually did, which parts of a conversation were meant to be followed and which were meant to be left alone. She let it go. She went back to the vendor list. Rosa went to her own desk. The corridor stayed quiet. 40 floors above the world Tiffany moved through, Kang Do-hyun sat in his private office with the door closed and the distribution folder open on his desk. The margin note corrected the transposition on clause 14.3. Again, "You're welcome, and you owe me either dinner or an apology. I'll accept either." TL was the 11th one he had received. He had kept all of them. They were in the bottom right drawer of his desk, in a manila folder labeled with a date range that corresponded to the past 8 months, filed in order. He read the new one twice. He put it with the others. He had not responded to any of them. He was not going to respond to any of them. If he responded, even once, even briefly, she would know that he had read them, which she already suspected, but suspicion and confirmation were not the same thing, and he needed the distance that lived between the two. Outside his windows, Manhattan was fully lit for the morning. The city from up here looked exactly like it always looked, organized, purposeful, indifferent to any particular person. He had grown up watching his father manage power the way other men managed money, carefully, invisibly, always with an awareness that the only power that lasts is the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. He had internalized that lesson so completely that he sometimes couldn't locate the line between who he was as a man and who he had designed himself to be as a function. He pulled up the security feed on the monitor embedded in his desk, not the exterior cameras, the 38th floor corridor feed. She was at her desk, working, her back perfectly straight in the way that wasn't performance. He had watched enough performance to know the difference. She moved between her keyboard and a printed document with a small efficiency that was entirely her own, and he noted, as he always did, the precise angle at which she held a pen when she was thinking, and the way she would stop completely for approximately 2 seconds before she typed a particular kind of sentence, as if she were measuring the weight of the words before she committed them to the page. He had been watching this woman through a security camera for 11 months. He turned the feed off. He sat with that fact for a moment. Then he pressed the intercom. Jisoo. 30 seconds later, Jisoo Choi opened the office door and stood at the threshold. "I need to adjust the rotation on the executive floor maintenance crew," Do-hyun said. "Add a position. Start date is the 1st of next month." Jisoo said nothing for approximately 3 seconds. Then, I'll arrange it. I'll be filling the position myself. On alternate day rotations at the hours I've flagged in the system. The name on the credential will be Park. Another pause. Jisoo said, I understand. Anyone who recognizes me during those hours, which won't happen, but if it does, it becomes a company security exercise. We're testing the floor's response protocols. Jisoo looked at him, not judgmentally. The way Jisoo looked at things that required adaptation, with the focused calm of someone calculating load-bearing capacity. The 38th floor rotation, he said. Yes! Jisoo gave one nod. He pulled the door closed behind him without asking a single question, which was one of the reasons Do-hyun trusted him with his life. The first morning of the new rotation, Kang Do-hyun arrived at the service elevator at 6:45 a.m. He had not worn this uniform before. Gray, building maintenance issue, his name badge reading Park, but the logistics were not the challenge. The challenge was behavioral. He had spent 15 years being one of the most recognized men in every room he entered. He was about to become someone no one would look at. He pushed the cleaning cart to the 38th floor, unlocked the janitor's closet with the key Jisoo had arranged, parked the cart, and began working the corridor. The corridor that Tiffany Lin walked every morning at 7:45 a.m. She arrived at 7:47, 2 minutes later than her usual time. She came off the elevator with her bag over one shoulder, her blazer still slightly cold from the outside air, her hair immaculate, and she moved down the corridor toward her desk with the focused briskness of someone who had already been working in her head for the past 20 minutes on the subway. She passed him at the end of the corridor, where he was cleaning the baseboard near the kitchenette entrance. She glanced over. He kept his eyes on the baseboard. She said, Good morning. There's fresh coffee in the kitchenette. Help yourself, he said in a voice he had spent 40 minutes calibrating to be nonspecific. Thank you very much. She was already past him. He did not move for a long moment. Then he picked up his cloth and kept cleaning. Omo, K-fam. She offered him coffee. She just walked right past the man who runs the most powerful criminal network on the East Coast and offered him coffee. And he didn't move for a long time after she passed. Girl, the man is gone. He was gone before he walked into that corridor. I've done nails for women who've had powerful men completely unravel for them, and I am telling you, those stories start exactly like this, not with grand gestures. With a cup of coffee offered without looking up. The second time was easier. The fifth time was something close to routine. By the third week, Mr. Park had a standing morning coffee arrangement that had emerged naturally, without discussion. Tiffany made a pot before 8 a.m. She poured one for herself and left one on the kitchenette counter before she went back to her desk. And Mr. Park would collect it at some point during his corridor rounds. It was not a grand gesture on either side. It was the accumulation of two courteous people sharing a space efficiently. Except that one of those courteous people was losing his mind. He had thought, if he was honest with himself, which he was only in the service elevator between the parking level and the 38th floor, that he would see her in this context and it would demystify something. He would hear her complain about the commute, or see that the notes were performance, or understand that the woman in the margin notes was a character she wore at work and not the actual person. That was what he had needed to find out. Whether the woman he had become somewhat alarmed by over the course of 11 months of reading her annotations was real. She was real. She was more real in the corridor at 4:30 p.m. when the floor was quiet than she was in any document she had ever produced, and the documents were already extraordinary. She complained, sometimes when the floor was empty enough to allow it, not to him specifically, just into the air of the corridor, in the way of someone who has run out of patience and needs somewhere to put it. The complaint was never about trivial things. It was always about a system error, an institutional failure, something that had been done carelessly when it should have been done precisely. She cared about precision the way some people care about justice, personally, morally, with a frustration that was also a form of love. He cleaned windows. He emptied waste bins. He pushed the cart, and he listened to everything. 3 weeks in, on a Tuesday afternoon, Tiffany was at her desk with the door to the small side office open. Most of the floor had gone. She was finishing something. He could hear the brief, decisive tap of keys that meant she was closing a document. Then she stopped. He heard her push her chair back slightly. When he came around the corner of the corridor with the cart, she was standing at the window, looking at the city in the way people do when they are thinking about something entirely different from what they're looking at. "Mr. Park?" she said, without turning around. He stopped the cart. "Yes." "Do you ever think your boss doesn't notice what you do?" He stood very still. "Sometimes. And what do you do about it?" He considered this. He said, "I do the work anyway, and I leave the rest to him." She turned around and looked at him, at Mr. Park, at the gray uniform and the glasses and the cap pulled low, with an expression he had never been able to produce on her face as himself. It was a look of simple recognition, the kind that doesn't ask for credentials. "That's a very sensible answer," she said. "You seem like someone who already knew that." She looked back at the window. "I do know it. It's just different, hearing it from someone who isn't me." A pause. "He notices. I know he notices. He just can't say it." Du-Yoon stood in the corridor in his gray uniform and understood, for the first time in his adult life, that the most dangerous position available to him was not in any room his enemies had access to. It was here, in this corridor, talking about himself in the third person to the woman he was in love with, while she looked out at the city and trusted a janitor with the things she couldn't say to her boss. He picked up his cloth and went back to work. It was the only safe thing he could do. By the end of the first month, he had heard her say, across different afternoons, that she had a sister in Atlanta she spoke to on Sundays, that she had been in Manhattan for 4 years and still found the summers difficult, that she believed a contract without a clean escalation clause was a liability disguised as an agreement, and that she had never once in her professional life done something she was not proud of, which was a sentence she said with a quietness that told him it had cost her something to maintain. He filed all of it the way he filed everything important, without writing it down, without losing a word. And every morning at 7:45, when she came off the elevator and passed him in the corridor on her way to her desk, he heard her say good morning to Mr. Park in the same uncomplicated voice she used for everyone who worked in the building, the voice that said, "You matter, you are seen, you are not invisible to me." And he understood that this, all of it, was exactly what he had come for. He had come to know if she was real. She was real. She was more real than anything he managed. And he had absolutely no idea what to do about that. The margin note in that morning's distribution folder had said, Clause 7 references a jurisdiction that changed its regulatory framework in Q3, attaching the updated filing. This would have been a problem. "You're welcome." TL, he had read it in his office. He had put it in the folder with the others. He had pulled up the security feed and watched her arrive. Then he had gone to the service elevator and become Mr. Park. He was going to run out of time. He could feel it the way he felt other impending things, not with alarm exactly. With the particular kind of clarity that comes right before something changes, when the shape of what's coming is visible, even if the exact moment isn't. He just didn't know yet what form the change was going to take. On the 4th week of the arrangement, he heard her laugh for the first time. Not a professional laugh, not the controlled, measured laugh she produced in meetings when a client made a comment that required social acknowledgement. A real one, short, surprised, involuntary. It came from the kitchenette, where she had apparently discovered that someone had reorganized the supply cabinet in a way she found completely unreasonable, and she was recounting this discovery to the empty corridor while making tea. He heard, "Who does this? Who puts the whole bean coffee above the tea when there is no grinder on this floor? This is a war crime." He did not laugh. He moved the cart slightly slower down the corridor so he could hear the rest. She sorted the cabinet herself. He heard the containers moving, still talking under her breath in the tone of someone who is too annoyed to stay annoyed and has crossed into the realm of finding the situation entertaining. Then she came out of the kitchenette with her tea and nearly walked into the cart. "Sorry," she said, then, seeing who it was, "Mr. Park! You didn't happen to reorganize the supplies cabinet?" "No. Thank you for not lying to spare my feelings." She looked at her tea. "Someone reorganized the supply cabinet in a way that cannot possibly have been intentional. I have put it back correctly," he said carefully. "I'm sure they'll appreciate it. They won't even notice." She said this without real bitterness, as a simple fact the way she stated most facts. People rarely notice when something has been put right. They only notice when it goes wrong again. She looked up at him. "That's the job, though. Making sure it doesn't go wrong," he said. "Is that why you do it?" She considered this. "Partly," she looked at the tea, "partly because I'm good at it, and partly because," She paused, and he had the sense of watching someone that decide something. Because when you do it right, even if nobody notices, the thing still works. The contract is clean. The meeting happens on time. The error doesn't land in the signature package. She looked back up. The honey brown of her eyes in the corridor light was very direct. The result exists even if the credit doesn't. Do-hyun had managed networks of 40 men. He had negotiated agreements that his own lawyers hadn't understood until he walked them through the structure 3 times. He had made decisions in rooms where the wrong answer would have cost lives, and he had made them calmly because that was the version of himself he had built. He was not calm right now. He was standing in a corridor in a gray uniform holding a mop handle, and the woman in front of him had just articulated, in 4 sentences, the entire philosophy by which he had run his operation for 15 years, and she had arrived at it on her own, from her desk, doing his contracts. He said, "You're right." She looked at him for a moment, just a second longer than a casual look, and then she smiled. Not the professional smile, the real one, small and slightly crooked on the left side. "You're easy to talk to, Mr. Park," she said. "For someone who barely talks." She went back to her desk. He stood in the corridor for a moment, and then he started cleaning again, because it was what Mr. Park would do, and Mr. Park had the discipline to keep moving even when Kang Do-hyun did not. By the end of the month, he had stopped pretending that he had come for information. He had the information. He had known the real version of her by the 3rd week. What he was doing now was something else. Something without a clean operational name, something that had no exit strategy attached to it. He was staying because being here, in the gray uniform with the cart, in the corridor at 4:30 in the afternoon, was the only time in the last 2 years that he had existed as a version of himself without performance attached to it. Not the CEO, not the architect of anything. Just a man in the corridor listening to a woman be honest about her work and her frustration and the small daily cost of caring about things that no one else was looking at. He was going to have to end it. He knew this. He also knew he wasn't going to end it yet. And that was the most honest thing he had admitted to himself in a very long time. On the 4th week of the arrangement, he heard her laugh for the first time. Not a professional laugh, not the controlled, measured kind she produced in meetings when a client made a comment requiring social acknowledgement. A real one, short, surprised, involuntary. It came from the kitchenette, where she had apparently discovered that someone had reorganized the supply cabinet in a way she found completely unreasonable, and she was recounting this discovery to the empty corridor while making tea. He heard, "Who does this? Who puts whole bean coffee above the tea when there is no grinder on this floor? This is a war crime." He did not laugh. He moved the cart slightly slower down the corridor so he could hear the rest. She sorted the cabinet herself. He heard the containers moving, still talking under her breath in the tone of someone who is too annoyed to stay annoyed and has crossed into the territory of finding the situation entertaining. Then she came out of the kitchenette with her tea and nearly walked into the cart. "Sorry," she said, then recognizing who it was, "Mr. Park. You didn't happen to reorganize the supply cabinet?" "No. Thank you for not lying to spare my feelings." She looked at the tea. "Someone put it back completely wrong." "I've fixed it," he said carefully. "I'm sure they'll appreciate it. They won't even notice." She said this without bitterness, as a simple fact the way she stated most facts. People rarely notice when something has been put right. They only notice when it goes wrong again. She looked up at him. "That's the job, though, making sure it doesn't go wrong." He said, "Is that why you do it?" She considered this. "Partly," she looked at the tea, "partly because I'm good at it. And partly because," she paused, and he had the sense of watching someone decide something, because when you do it right, even if nobody notices, the thing still works. The contract is clean. The meeting happens on time. The error doesn't land in the signature package. She looked back up. The warm brown of her eyes in the corridor light was very direct. The result exists even if the credit doesn't. Do-hyun had managed networks of 40 men. He had negotiated agreements that his own lawyers hadn't fully understood until he walked them through the structure 3 times. He had made decisions in rooms where the wrong answer would have cost lives, and he had made them calmly because that was the version of himself he had spent 15 years building. He was not calm right now. He was standing in a corridor in a gray uniform holding a mop handle, and the woman in front of him had just articulated, in 4 sentences, the entire operational philosophy by which he had run his network since the age of 22. She had arrived at it independently from a secretary's desk, doing his contracts. He said, "You're right." She looked at him for a moment, a half second longer than a casual look, and then she smiled. Not the professional smile, the real one, small and slightly crooked on the left side. "You're easy to talk to, Mr. Park," she said. "For someone who barely talks." She went back to her desk. He stood in the corridor for a beat, and then he started cleaning again, because it was what Mr. Park would do, and Mr. Park had the discipline to keep moving even when Kang Do-hyun did not. Mark my words, K-fam, and I need you to hear this clearly. A man who has never been vulnerable in his life, who has built his entire existence around not being visible in any way that matters, found the only space where he could breathe clearly inside a gray uniform on a floor where nobody knew who he was. You think that's about information? It stopped being about information in the second week. This was about the one place in his entire world where nobody expected anything from him. And she gave him that without knowing she was doing it. I need a second. By the end of the month, he had stopped pretending, even to himself in the service elevator between shifts, that he had come for information. He had the information. He had known the real version of her by the third week. What he was doing now was something else, something without a clean operational name, something that had no exit strategy and no defined perimeter. He was staying because this corridor, at 4:30 in the afternoon with the light going amber through the floor-to-ceiling windows, was the only place in his known world where he existed without architecture around him. Not the CEO, not the architect of anything. Just a man listening to a woman be honest about her work and her frustration and the quiet daily discipline of caring about things that no one else was watching. He knew he would have to end it eventually. He also knew he was not going to end it yet. And the gap between those two facts was the most honest thing he had permitted himself in a very long time. It started with coffee and became something much harder to name. By the second month of the arrangement, Tiffany Lin had established a rhythm with Mr. Park that operated outside the official choreography of the building. It wasn't friendship exactly. She maintained too much of her natural composure for it to be that casual, and Mr. Park was too contained to invite that kind of easy label. It was more like a standing agreement. She worked her hours, he worked his, and the corridor between the 38th floor kitchenette and the north end supply closet became, in the quiet stretches of the afternoon, a shared space where neither of them was performing anything for anyone. She had stopped explaining herself to him. She had started just talking. There is a particular kind of person, K-fam, that you only meet once in a long time. The person you can talk to without needing to arrange what you're going to say first. I've had maybe 3 in my life. One of them was my grandmother. One was a client in Brentwood who I used to do nails for every Thursday, a woman who'd been married 40 years and had the calmest eyes I've ever seen on anyone. And the third one you'll figure out by the end of this video. But the point is, it's rare. And when Tiffany found that in Mr. Park, when she started talking to the janitor on her floor the way you talk to someone who already knows the worst version of events and is still standing there, that was the beginning of the real story. Not the notes to her boss. This. On a Wednesday afternoon in the 5th week, she came back from a meeting that had run 40 minutes over schedule, sat down at her desk, and made no move to open her laptop. She just sat there with her hands folded on the desk surface, looking at the city through the glass wall in the particular way of someone who is not looking at the city at all. Mr. Park came around the corner with the cart. He looked at her. He kept moving. She said, without turning, "Have you ever worked for someone you couldn't figure out?" He stopped the cart. He picked up the microfiber cloth and started on the window frame at the end of the corridor. From that angle, his back was to her. He said, "What kind of person are you trying to figure out? The kind who reads everything you put in front of him." She uncrossed her hands and smoothed the front of her skirt, one small, composed movement. Who corrects nothing, questions nothing, responds to nothing, and yet somehow every decision that comes back through the official channels is better than what was there before. Which means he's listening. He's just not saying so. Do-hyun kept his hands on the window frame. He said, "Maybe he doesn't know how to say so without saying too much." A pause. Then, "That's a very specific answer. It's a common problem for a certain kind of person." Tiffany turned in her chair to look at Mr. Park's back. She studied him for a moment. Then she said quietly, "I think he's afraid of me." Which is the strangest thing, because he's not afraid of anything. Do-hyun said nothing. He moved the cloth to the corner of the frame. She said, I leave him notes in the margins of his reports. She said this matter-of-factly, as if she were reporting a filing method. I know he reads them. I know because the decisions change in ways that only make sense if he's read the annotations. But he's never responded. Not once, she paused. I keep leaving them anyway. Why? She thought about this. Because it's the only conversation available. She turned back to her laptop. Don't mind me, Mr. Park. I'm just talking out loud, he said. I don't mind. She opened her laptop. He kept cleaning. The corridor stayed quiet, and in the quiet, something settled. The specific weight of two people who have understood something about each other without articulating any of it. 3 days later, she told him she liked her boss. She didn't use those exact words immediately. She built toward it the way she built toward everything that mattered. Carefully, almost analytically, as if she were examining the fact from the outside before she was willing to own it. It was a Friday afternoon. Most of the floor had cleared early for a company wellness event that Tiffany had declined because she had 3 deliverables due. Mr. Park was working the corridor. She was at her desk with a document open and a red pen in her hand, but she hadn't circled anything in 12 minutes. She said, Mr. Park, do you think it's possible to be fully aware that something is a bad idea and choose it anyway? He said. Depends on what kind of bad idea. The kind where the problem isn't the idea itself. The problem is the consequences, the context, the fact that there is no version where it works cleanly. She tapped the end of the red pen against the desk. The idea itself is fine. Better than fine, he said carefully. What's the idea? She put the pen down. She looked at the window for a moment. Then she said, with the tone of someone who has decided to say a true thing and is committing to it, My boss is insufferable, Mr. Park. He's cold. He gives orders through a calendar system and annotated documents, and I have been in the same building as this man for 2 years, and we have had exactly one direct conversation. And even in that conversation, he was professionally correct in a way that managed to communicate absolutely nothing personal. She stopped. And I can't stop thinking about him. Do-hyun stood very still at the north end of the corridor, his back to her, both hands on the cart handle. Which is, Tiffany continued, with a slight wry exhale that wasn't quite a laugh, objectively the worst idea I have ever had. Because he is my employer, which makes it inappropriate. Because he operates in a world I can see the edges of and have the good sense not to look at directly, which makes it complicated. And because the man has demonstrated zero interest in anything outside of operational performance, which makes it hopeless. She picked up the pen again. But I think I like him anyway, which doesn't solve anything. But there it is. She opened her document and started reading. Do-hyun did not move for approximately 10 seconds. Then he pushed the cart back around the corner and went to the service corridor, where he stood with his back against the wall for 4 full minutes and said absolutely nothing to the empty concrete and the fluorescent light above his head. Day back, K-fam, she went and said it, out loud, to him, without knowing it was him. She told the man she was in love with that she was in love with him, and he had to stand in a service corridor and process that fact in a gray uniform with cleaning supplies, because that was the situation he had built for himself. Jinja, I cannot. And the thing that gets me every time is that he could have said something right then. He could have said anything, but he didn't. Because what was Mr. Park supposed to say? What does the janitor say to that? So he just stood there with all of it and then went back to work. That's the cruelest part. He had to go back to work. After that Friday, something shifted, not in how she spoke to him, which stayed exactly the same, but in how he moved. He was more careful. He gave the cart more time in the north corridor, the section closest to her desk, and less time in the south corridor where he was visible from the elevator bank. He started to time his appearances in the kitchenette to the moments when the floor was quiet enough that other people wouldn't overhear her if she spoke. He was, without acknowledging this to himself directly, optimizing the conditions for her to talk to him. This is important to understand, K-fam, because there's a difference between a man who is obsessed with a woman and a man who is in love with her, and the difference is not about intensity. It's about what the intensity is organized around. Do-hyun wasn't trying to see more of her or possess more of her. He was trying to protect more of her. He was engineering the corridor so she had a safe place to say the things she couldn't say anywhere else. That's not control. That's something more careful than that. I'm not saying it's uncomplicated. We're going to get to the complicated part, don't worry. But I'm saying I recognize what that looked like because I've seen both kinds of men up close in this work. You figure out which is which pretty fast when your job is to sit in someone's kitchen for 4 hours. The complication arrived in the form of a man named Daniel Holt. Holt was an investment director, mid-40s, newly transferred to the New York office from the Chicago division. He was handsome in the way of someone who knew it and had decided to lead with it. Easy smile, good suit, the kind of man who speaks slightly too warmly to assistants and secretaries because he has learned that it reads as down to earth. He stopped by Tiffany's desk on his third day with a document that could have been emailed, complimented her on a summary she had prepared, and asked her, with the confident casualness of someone who expects a yes, whether she'd like to get coffee sometime. Tiffany thanked him. She said she didn't mix coffee with work. He laughed and said she was probably right. He came back 3 days later with another document that could have been emailed. From the North Corridor, Do-hyun watched both interactions. He pressed the intercom in the service closet. Jisoo answered in 4 seconds. Do-hyun said, "Daniel Holt, transferred from Chicago. Pull his performance metrics. Compare them against available positions in the Boston satellite." A pause. "Do it this week." Jisoo said, "Understood." Holt's transfer came through 9 days later. He was in Boston by the following Tuesday. He didn't stop by Tiffany's desk after the first conversation. Tiffany noticed. She noticed with the precision she applied to everything. Not paranoid, not dramatic, just accurate. She mentioned it to Rosa over lunch. Holt transferred fast. Rosa said, "Boston's good. He just got here." Rosa looked at her soup. "Sometimes the timing just works out." Tiffany looked at her. Rosa did not look up. Tiffany picked up her fork and did not bring it up again. But she left a note in that week's distribution folder that was different from the others. Not a work annotation. Just one line, in the margin of a budget report, where it would land only if the reader was already looking for it. "If you're going to move everyone who smiles at me, you could at least have the courage to appear yourself." TL Do-hyun read it in his office with the door closed and both hands flat on the desk for a moment before he could pick up the document again. She knew something was off. She didn't have the complete picture yet. She didn't have his name on it, didn't have the specific mechanism. But Tiffany Lin had spent 2 years reading the operational patterns of a company that communicated in implications and official channels. And she had gotten very good at reading between both. The pattern of disappearances wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. It was a transfer here, a reassignment there, a vendor contract ending at renewal rather than continuing. Each one individually explainable, collectively impossible to ignore. She mentioned it to Mr. Park on a Thursday afternoon in the 7th week. "I've been thinking about something," she said without preamble. She was filing documents at the cabinet near the corridor end, which put her close enough to speak without raising her voice. "Men keep leaving this floor." Mr. Park was cleaning the glass door of the supply closet. "People move, not at this rate, and not always to places that make professional sense." She put a folder in the cabinet and pulled out another. A director was transferred to Sao Paulo in a week. A client lost building access the same month he asked for my direct line. A vendor's contract wasn't renewed after he sent flowers to the office. She paused. Flowers to the floor. Not specifically to me. Maybe it was coincidence. I don't believe in coincidence at this scale. She closed the cabinet. "And neither do you, I suspect." She said this simply without accusation. She was not accusing Mr. Park of anything. She was thinking out loud, and she was thinking out loud with the person who had proven over 7 weeks that her thoughts were safe in his vicinity. Do-hyun said nothing. She said, "Someone is making decisions about who can be near me. And those decisions aren't coming from me." A pause. "Which means they're coming from somewhere above me." He said, "What are you going to do about it?" She was quiet for a moment. "Then I already did something. I left a note." She said this without explanation, the way she referenced the notes when she referenced them, as if he already knew what she meant. Which he did, though not in the way she thought. Whether anything comes of it is his problem. She went back to her desk. Do-hyun stayed with the supply closet glass for another minute, his reflection looking back at him in the gray uniform and the glasses and the cap pulled low over his face. He had been in rooms with people who had tried to negotiate with him, threaten him, outmaneuver him. None of them had made him feel as off balance as a woman doing her filing and calmly explaining that she had figured out the shape of his operation without being given any of the specific details. She had left him a note. She was going to keep leaving notes until something changed. He picked up his cloth and went back to work. He was running out of corridor. That evening, alone in his office with the security feed off and the city dark below the windows, Kang Do-hyun sat with the manila folder in front of him and read all 12 margin notes in order, beginning to end. The handwriting was the same in each one, her cleanest hand, the one she used for the things that mattered. And the tone moved from professional annotation to something more direct. And then to the last one, which was simply, if you're going to move everyone who smiles at me, you could at least have the courage to appear yourself. He put the folder back in the drawer. He locked it. He thought about what courage looked like when the exposure involved was not physical. He had never had trouble with physical exposure. He had been in rooms where the wrong answer meant violence and had answered correctly and calmly. But this was different. This was a woman who had his notes in a drawer and his attention on the security feed and his heart in a gray uniform on her floor, and she was asking him to appear. And he could not appear as Do-hyun without destroying Mr. Park, and he could not appear as Mr. Park without her eventually understanding what she was looking at. The shape of his problem had become very clear. He had two versions of himself and one woman, and she had fallen in love with both of them separately without knowing they were the same man. Whatever was coming next, he was not going to be the one to control it. That was new. In 15 years of building systems designed to give him control over outcomes, he had finally built one that controlled him. The week after she left the note about courage, something changed in Tiffany. Not her work. The work was exactly what it had always been. Exact, early, impeccable, with the occasional correction quietly routed so that the error never reached the surface. But in the corridor with Mr. Park, she was different, less forthcoming, more watchful. She still offered coffee. She still accepted his presence in the afternoon corridor hours. But the openness of the previous weeks had contracted slightly, the way a room contracts when someone in it has decided to be more careful. Do-hyun noticed it immediately. He noticed it the way he noticed all the small indicators of internal adjustment in the people around him. Not because he was suspicious, but because he had spent 15 years being the kind of person who had to know where the shifts were happening before they became movements. On the Tuesday of that week, she said to him, without particular emphasis, "Do you ever get the feeling that someone knows more about your situation than they're letting on?" He kept his hands on the cart. "What kind of situation?" "Any kind." She was at the kitchenette counter, rinsing her coffee cup. "I keep thinking about the transfers, about the pattern. And I keep wondering who has visibility into my floor's personnel movements that I don't have." She set the cup on the drying rack. "Someone operational. Someone with access to the facility systems, the contract cycles, the calendar." She paused. "Someone who knows my schedule well enough to know who I interact with and when." This was closer than she had gotten before. Not quite at the destination, but on the road to it. Do-hyun said, "That sounds like it could be anyone in leadership." "Yes," she said. "It could." She dried her hands on the paper towel and looked at him. Really looked, the way she occasionally did, the direct warm brown gaze that went slightly too deep to be casual. Or it could be someone a lot closer to the floor than leadership usually gets. He said nothing. She threw away the paper towel. "Never mind, Mr. Park. I'm thinking out loud again." She went back to her desk. He cleaned the kitchenette counter for the next 5 minutes with the methodical care of someone who needs their hands occupied because their mind is doing something too complicated for stillness. She had not arrived at the answer yet, but she was no longer looking in the wrong direction. He told Jisoo that week that he needed to think about the timeline. They were in Do-hyun's private office, the one conversation they had every week that was not conducted through any channel that could be recorded. Jisoo stood near the door. Do-hyun sat at his desk. "She's getting close," Do-hyun said. Not with alarm. With the particular focus he applied to situations that were resolving in directions he hadn't designed. "I know," Jisoo said. "If she figures it out on her own, before I can control how the information lands." Do-hyun stopped. "It becomes something I can't manage." Jisoo was quiet for a moment. Then, "There's also the external situation." He put a folder on the desk. "One of the Shin family's people has been making inquiries. Not about you. About the secretary on the 38th floor." Do-hyun opened the folder. He read the single page inside. He closed it. How recent? 3 days. Jisoo's voice was flat. They've identified that the person most likely to have access to your internal routing communications is your executive secretary. They've been watching the floor. Do-hyun was quiet for a moment. Then he said, double the external detail on the building without making it visible to the staff. I want eyes on the B2 parking level and the service entrance at all times. And I want to know every time someone runs a search on Tiffany Lin from an external network. Jisoo said, understood. She's not to know. She's already suspicious of the transfers. Of the transfers, yes. Do-hyun looked at the window. Not of this, he paused, not of being a target. Jisoo picked up the folder. At the door, he paused. How long are you planning to maintain the current arrangement? Do-hyun didn't answer immediately. Then, as long as necessary, Jisoo left without pressing it. He was the only person in Do-hyun's orbit who understood the difference between an answer and a deflection, and had the discipline to let the deflection stand. The note Tiffany left that Thursday was unlike the others. She had been in a meeting with 2 external consultants who had spoken around her for 40 minutes, addressing all their comments to the male assistant from the legal department who had been sent as a witness and who had less operational knowledge of the subject matter than Tiffany did in any random 6-minute span of her workday. She had come back to her desk and spent 14 minutes in silence. She counted them later because it was that kind of silence. Before she picked up the red pen and opened the quarterly review that was in the distribution folder. She wrote in the margin, I have sat in 2 years of meetings where people looked past me to find someone with less information and more authority. I do not leave notes to be charming, Mr. Kang. I leave them because they are the only form of conversation available to me in this building, and I am running out of patience with conversations that go one way. If you read these, and I know you do, then you know exactly what I'm saying. And if you can't say it back, I understand. But I needed to say it first. TL. She put it in the distribution folder. She went back to work. Do-hyun read it at 6 in the evening, alone in his office. He sat with it for a long time. Then he put it in the manila folder with the others, in order, and locked the drawer. He pressed the intercom. Jisoo, yes! A pause. Long enough that Jisoo might have thought the line had dropped. Cancel my evening schedule. All of it. Another pause. I'm going to the 38th floor, Jisoo said. As Do-hyun? As Do-hyun, he went. He took the regular elevator, not the service elevator. He wore his suit, the navy one, no tie. He walked down the 38th floor corridor at 6:15 in the evening when almost no one was left. Tiffany was at her desk. She looked up when she heard footsteps, not startled, because Tiffany Lin was not the kind of person who startled. And then she was very still for a moment when she saw who it was. She said, Mr. Kang. He stopped at the edge of her desk. He said, you corrected 14 documents this quarter that would have created problems if they had reached signature. She looked at him. I know. I read all of them. I know that too. He was quiet for a moment. He was not good at this, at standing in a room without the formal structure of a meeting around him, without the operational purpose that gave every other conversation its shape. He said, I owe you dinner or an apology. She looked at him with an expression he had never been able to produce on her face before, and then he realized he had produced it before many times from the other end of the corridor in a gray uniform and glasses. She said, which one are you offering? He said, whichever you'll take. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, come back with an answer when you've decided. She looked back at her screen. Good night, Mr. Kang. He stood there for a second. Then he walked back to the elevator. The doors closed. In the corridor, on his way up to his floor, he understood something he should have understood earlier. She was not going to make this easy for him, and she was right not to. He had spent months asking her to be visible to a version of him she didn't know existed. The least he could do was be visible first. He just wasn't ready yet. And the fact that he wasn't ready was the thing that was going to cost him more than anything that had come before. The man in the elevator did not belong there. Tiffany registered this before she could articulate why. He was well-dressed, which was not unusual in this building. He smiled at her when the doors closed, which was not unusual either. What was unusual was that he knew her name before she had said a word, and that the building badge clipped to his jacket pocket belonged to a division that had no operational reason to be on the 38th floor at 6:40 in the evening. Miss Lin, he said with the specific warmth of someone who has practiced the warmth. I was hoping to catch you. I represent a group of investors interested in the Kang Imperial Group's Northwest real estate portfolio. We understand you have significant visibility into the internal routing of communications in that division. She looked at him. She did not look at the badge. She had already noted the badge. That's a lot of words, she said, for elevator small talk. He smiled again. He extended a business card between two fingers, the gesture of a man accustomed to this transaction going smoothly. Just a conversation, very informal. The kind of thing that's easier over coffee than through official channels. The doors opened at the lobby. He held the card out. Think about it. She took the card because taking it was faster than not taking it. She walked through the lobby without looking at him again. She pushed through the glass doors into the October air and kept walking one full block before she stopped at a corner and looked at the card. It was clean, minimal, the kind of card that tells you less than a card with more text on it would. A name, a number, no company, no address. She put it in her blazer pocket. She took the subway home. In her apartment in Brooklyn, at the small kitchen table with the city audible through the window, she kept cracked, even in October, because she liked the sound of it. Tiffany Lynn sat with the card in front of her and thought with the precision she applied to everything that mattered. The man had known her name before she introduced herself. He had referenced a specific division, the Northwest real estate portfolio, which was not public information in any detailed sense. He had implied that she had visibility into internal routing communications, which was true, and which was not the kind of thing a casual investor would know about an executive secretary unless someone had told them exactly where to look. She was not a door that had been accidentally left open. She had been specifically identified. She was a target. She sat with that word for a long time. Not frightened, Tiffany did not move immediately to fear. She moved first to analysis, but with the specific gravity of someone who has just understood that the game they thought they were in and the game they are actually in are not the same game. She thought about the transfers, the reassignments, the vendor whose contract had lapsed, the director in Sao Paulo. She had read those things as Doohyun protecting her proximity, as the behavior of a man who was possessive or controlling and this was the interpretation she had allowed herself privately, interested in keeping her near. She had even, in moments of clarity that felt like courage at the time, left him notes about it, dared him to appear. What she had not considered was that he had been protecting her from something specific, not from his own jealousy, from exposure. She was a vulnerability in his network. That was why she was being moved around men who got too close. Not because he wanted her for himself, but because men who got close to her became men who might be used to reach him. Every smile, every coffee invitation, every document that could have been emailed in person was a potential vector. And whoever had found her tonight had figured that out long before she had. Oh, K-Fam! I have to stop here for 1 second, because I know this feeling. Not the Mafia part. I have not personally been identified as an entry point into a Korean crime network, to be very clear. But the feeling of sitting somewhere at night and realizing that the situation you thought you understood has a completely different architecture than the one you were looking at, that's not an abstract feeling. That's a very specific, very cold kind of clarity. I felt it the night I found the messages on my ex's phone. The whole story rearranged itself in about 4 minutes. And it didn't hurt the way I expected it to hurt. It hurt in a quieter way. Like something just stopped making the noise it had been making. That's what Tiffany was feeling right now. And she hadn't even gotten to the worst part yet. She did not sleep well that night. She did not call anyone. In the morning, she dressed impeccably. Blazer, white shirt, skirt, nude heels, because dressing impeccably was one of the things she did when she needed the exterior to hold while the interior was recalibrating. She arrived at 7:45 a.m. She made 1 pot of coffee. She placed a cup on the counter for Mr. Park. She sat down at her desk and opened her laptop. She did not leave a note in the distribution folder that morning. Mr. Park appeared at his usual time. He collected the coffee. He came around the corner of the corridor with the cart. He looked at her desk and he knew immediately, with the particular kind of knowing that comes from 2 months of learning someone's daily signals, that something was different. She was working with her full attention. No pauses, no looking at the window. The posture that said she was not going to look up, which meant there was something she was managing that she was not ready to say. He worked the corridor. He did not attempt conversation. At 4:30, when the floor was quiet, she was still at her desk. He brought the cart to the south end of the corridor, closer to the elevator bank, to give her space. She spoke without looking up. Mr. Park. Yes. If you worked for someone whose world had a dangerous side, and you didn't know how dangerous, how much would you want to know? He stopped the cart. Carefully, what do you mean? She stopped. She put her pen down. She looked at the window. If someone came to you and implied that your value to your employer was not just professional, that there were other people who knew who you worked for and thought that was useful information. Would you want to know the full picture? Or would you rather have the part of the story where everything is normal? He said, Is someone approaching you? The question came out with a precision that didn't belong to Mr. Park. It was a question asked by someone who already knew the answer and needed to hear it confirmed before they acted. She felt it, the specific weight of it, and she turned away from the window to look at him. He was looking at her, not the way he usually looked at her, from a careful distance, managed, composed. He was looking at her the way someone looks when they are calculating something very quickly and have momentarily run out of room for performance. She said, You know about it. He said, I don't know specifically what happened, but you know the category. He did not deny it. This was a form of honesty that cost him something. She could see that it cost him something, and she noted it without deciding yet what it meant. She said, Tell me what I need to know. He said, You're safe. The building is protected. You are not in immediate danger. That's not the same as telling me what I need to know. No, he said. It's not. The corridor was very quiet. Tiffany looked at the man in the gray uniform and the glasses and the low-pulled cap, and something in her was very close to understanding something that she was not yet ready to arrive at. She turned back to her desk. Thank you, she said. For the honest answer, at least. He picked up the cart handle. He went back to cleaning. He did not leave the floor for another 40 minutes, and neither of them spoke again. That evening, Do-hyun called Jisoo. The Shin family's man made contact, he said. I know. I have the lobby footage. And she handled it well. She didn't give him anything. A pause. She didn't look scared either. She looked like someone doing math. Do-hyun was quiet. The protection detail, can you increase the perimeter coverage without it being visible to her? Already done. Another pause. She's going to figure it out, Do-hyun. I know. The arrangement is becoming a liability. Not for you. For her. Jisoo said this without judgment, which was the particular quality that made him irreplaceable. Every day she doesn't know the full picture is a day someone else can use that gap. I know, Do-hyun said again. Jisoo was silent for a moment. Then, the gala is in 3 weeks. Yes, it's a natural moment for the 38th floor to have full security visibility, Do-hyun said. I'm aware, Jisoo said. I'm just noting the calendar. He hung up. Do-hyun sat in his office with the security feed off and the city dark and the manila folder in the bottom right drawer, locked, all 12 notes inside it in order. 3 weeks. For the next 10 days, Tiffany moved through the building with an adjusted awareness. She was not paranoid. Paranoia required an unexamined fear, and she had examined hers precisely. She was careful. She noticed who waited for the elevator with her and who stood a beat too long in the lobby. She noted the 2 new security personnel who had appeared at the building entrances. Different height, different agency badge, positioned at angles that differed from the existing team's rotation. She knew that personnel did not appear in new positions at a luxury building's entrances without a specific reason. She left a note in the distribution folder that was different from any she had left before. It said, I have been approached by someone who knows my name and my employer and the specific division I work for. I want to understand how they found me. I want to understand what I am to this organization beyond my job description. I am asking you directly, which I understand is something neither of us has done before. I am not asking to be protected without information. I am asking to understand the situation I am actually in. TL, she did not mark it urgent. She filed it in its usual position, under the quarterly compliance review, where he would find it when he found it. Then she went back to work with the composure of someone who has made a decision and is now waiting for the outcome. Do-hyun read it at 5 in the afternoon. He read it twice. He put it in the folder with the others. He did not go to the 38th floor. He did not appear as Mr. Park that afternoon. What he did was sit in his office and understand, with the specific clarity that arrives when a situation has finally become undeniable, that the woman on his 38th floor had asked him directly for an honest conversation, and he had given her nothing. He had sent 2 new bodies to stand at the entrance of the building she worked in. He had increased the digital surveillance on the people who were watching her. He had done everything within his considerable operational capacity to protect her, and he had left her sitting at her desk figuring out the shape of a situation she deserved to understand. He had made her a target by caring about her, and he had made her more vulnerable by not telling her that he cared. For the first time in 3 months of the arrangement, the service elevator felt like what it actually was, a way of hiding. Not from her, from the consequence of being known by her. He thought about the gala. He thought about the 3 weeks between now and then. He thought about what it would mean to arrive at a point where the disguise ended, not because he had chosen to remove it, but because this situation removed it for him. In a different world, he would have orchestrated this. He would have designed the reveal with the same deliberate architecture he brought to everything else. Controlled, precise, landing exactly where he intended it to land. In this world, the one he had built by becoming Mr. Park, the architecture had developed a will of its own. He could feel the end of the corridor approaching. He could not see what waited at the far end of it. He picked up the folder and locked it in the drawer. He thought, 3 weeks! He thought, she is the most honest person in this building, and I have been lying to her face every morning for 3 months. He thought, when this ends, and it will end, it has to end. She is going to have a right to be furious. He thought, she will be furious, and she will be right. And he will have to stand in it and not manage it, because this is the one thing in 15 years that he cannot manage from a position of control. He turned off the office light. He went home. Downstairs, at the building entrances, 2 men stood at new angles with their eyes on the street and the lobby and the parking level below, protecting a woman who did not know their names or the precise reason they were there, and who was almost ready to ask the right question. The gala was in 19 days. Mark my words, K-fam. This is the part of the story that people don't talk about when they talk about dangerous men and the women who love them. Not the power, not the tattoo, not the empire, not the way he cleared a room when he walked into it. They don't talk about the 19 days when a woman sat at her desk and understood she was in the middle of something much larger than she had signed up for, and kept showing up anyway. At 7:45 every morning, making 2 cups of coffee, doing the work, because that's who she was. And the man running the whole operation was sitting in an office 40 floors above her, realizing that she was braver than he was, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she kept showing up to a situation she didn't fully understand while he kept hiding from one he understood completely. That detail will stay with you. I promise it will stay with you. On the 14th day before the gala, Tiffany did something she had not done in 3 months. She came in at 7:45, made her coffee, and did not put a second cup on the kitchenette counter. Mr. Park appeared at his usual time. He saw the empty counter. He filled a cup himself from the pot she had made and went back to the corridor without saying anything. She did not look up from her screen. It happened again the next day, and the day after. Rosa noticed. Rosa said nothing, because Rosa had the particular intelligence of someone who knows when information is too fragile to handle out loud. But she watched. And on the 3rd morning, she came to the kitchenette at 8:15 and poured herself coffee and stood next to Tiffany, who was also getting a refill, and said very quietly, "Are you okay?" Tiffany said, "I'm fine." Rosa said, "You've been quiet. I'm always quiet. You've been a different kind of quiet." Rosa looked at her cup. "The kind that happens when someone is deciding something." Tiffany said, "I'm not deciding anything." This was not entirely true. She was deciding something. She just couldn't name what she was deciding, which was the most uncomfortable version of the process. She was somewhere between understanding and conclusion, in the uncertain space where a person knows that the next step they take is going to change the shape of something, and they don't yet know what the new shape will look like. The man in the elevator had not approached her again. She had not seen anyone she recognized as external surveillance in the lobby in 4 days. The 2 new security men at the building entrances had been rotated out and replaced with 2 others who stood at slightly different angles, but maintained the same coverage pattern. She noticed this because she had made it her business to notice it. She did not know who had ordered it. She suspected she did. On the 12th day before the gala, Do-hyun came to the 38th floor in his suit. It was after 6 in the evening. The floor was mostly empty. He did not announce himself. He came to the edge of her desk and stood there, and when she looked up, she was very still for a moment before she said neutrally, "Mr. King," he said, "your note." She waited. He said, "I can't give you the full picture. Not yet. But I can tell you that the people who approached you have been dealt with. You are not a target any longer." She looked at him. "What changed?" "The situation changed. That's not specific." "No," he met her eyes. "It isn't." He paused. "What I can tell you is that you were not brought into a dangerous situation accidentally, and that the steps taken to remove the danger were deliberate," she said, "by you." He didn't deny it. She said, "Why are you telling me this now?" He was quiet for a moment. Something crossed his face, not quite discomfort, but the expression of a man who has run up against the limit of a language that has served him well in every other context. He said, "Because you asked directly. And you deserved a direct answer." She looked at him for a long moment. He held the look without flinching. That was one of the things about him she had always noticed, from the one conversation they had ever had in 2 years, from the audio messages, from the recordings. He did not flinch. He had the stillness of someone who has decided not to be afraid of being seen, even when what he felt showed. She said, "Thank you." It was not forgiveness. It was not warmth. It was the specific courtesy of a woman who recognizes an honest moment and acknowledges it without pretending it resolves everything. He said, "There's an event in 12 days, the annual gala. I want you to be there. I'm usually at the events. That's part of the job." "Yes." He paused. "I want you to be there knowing that I'll be present." She looked at him. This was different from the operational requests. This was something else, the specific weight of an invitation from a man who did not invite easily. She knew this about him the way she knew many things about him. Not from being told, but from 2 years of watching the pattern. She said, "I'll be there." He nodded. He walked back to the elevator. When the doors closed, she sat for a moment with her hands flat on her desk, and then she opened her laptop and went back to work. She did not know what she was preparing for. She knew it was something. The next morning, she put 2 cups of coffee on the kitchenette counter again. Mr. Park collected his at the usual time. He said good morning. She said good morning. The corridor held them both in its familiar quiet, and neither of them said anything more, and the 7 remaining days before the gala counted themselves down in the specific silence of something that was almost over. She noticed during those last days that Mr. Park seemed different too, more deliberate, less hidden behind the routine of the cart and the cloth. He came to the kitchenette on the 6th day before the gala and said, without preamble, "Ms. Lynn." She looked up. "Whatever happens, I want you to know that you were never invisible." He said it with the flatness of a true statement, the way Mr. Park said most things. "In case that matters." She looked at him for a moment. She said, "It matters, Mr. Park." She looked back at the window. "More than you know." He nodded. He went back to the corridor. She sat at her desk with that sentence and turned it over and over again and could not find the bottom of it, which was unusual for a woman who found the bottom of most things. The gala was in 6 days. The corridor was quiet. The city moved below them, indifferent and enormous. And somewhere in the 50 floors of the Kang Imperial Group Tower, the distance between 2 versions of the same man and the woman who had somehow loved both of them was counting itself down to the moment when it would have to stop being distance at all. The top floor of the Kang Imperial Group Tower held light differently than the rest of the building. It was the same city, the same November sky pressing flat and pewter against the glass, the same Manhattan that Tiffany had looked at every morning for 2 years from 40 floors below. But up here the view was wider, the crowd dressed more carefully, and the champagne came in thinner glasses that made the whole event feel like something that had been composed rather than simply organized. She had helped compose it. She had built the run of show, confirmed the catering, coordinated the AV, verified the guest list twice. She knew the name of every person in the room by face and sector affiliation. She moved through the gala the way she moved through everything, with the efficiency of someone who had already done the structural work and now needed only to ensure the mechanics held. She answered questions from 2 junior associates, redirected a catering issue near the west window, and was on her way back through the connecting corridor when Adrian Vale appeared at her left. She recognized him by type before she recognized him by name, the particular posture of a man who had made a calculation about the evening and was implementing it. He was handsome, if you wanted that kind, broad-shouldered in a tuxedo that fit well and probably cost more than her monthly rent, with a champagne glass he had been carrying long enough that the confidence in holding it had become careless. "Miss Lynn," he said, "I've been trying to get 5 minutes with you for 3 months." She knew who he was. Adrian Vale, private equity, repeat client. She had managed his access credentials twice. "Mr. Vale, is there a work matter I can help you with?" He smiled. It was a smile that expected to land well. "No work matters tonight. Just, you've been everywhere in this building for 2 years, and somehow we've never actually talked." He tilted the champagne glass toward her, a gesture meant to be charming. "I have to say, the operation runs beautifully. Whatever you're doing to keep everything together on that floor, it shows." "Thank you," she said. "Enjoy the evening." She moved to step past him. He said, "Come on, stay a minute." He stepped slightly to the side, repositioning himself in the direction she was walking, casually, in the way of someone accustomed to navigation feeling like choice when it was actually adjustment. "You've been working all night. The event is going great. You can take 5 minutes." She stopped. She looked at him. "I'm working. It doesn't have to be like that," she said evenly. "Mr. Vale, I'm on the clock. Enjoy your evening." This time when she moved, he reached out and put his hand over hers. The back of her hand, briefly, firmly, the kind of contact that is technically minimal and practically a statement. She went still. She did not go frightened. She went very calm, the specific calm of a woman who has dealt with this calibration of man before and knows exactly where the lines are. She removed her hand from under his. She said, "Don't!" He laughed, the easy laugh of someone who has misread the room and refuses to accept the reading. "You've been smiling at people all night. I'm just asking for conversation. I've been managing an event," she said. "That is my job. This," she looked at his hand, "is not part of it." He reached for her arm. "Listen, K-fam. I need everyone to understand what just happened." He reached for her. After she said no. After she removed her hand. He heard her, and he went ahead anyway, because men like Adrian Vale have never in their adult lives had to reckon with the difference between what they want and what they are allowed. She had been clear. She had been professional. She had been more patient than she needed to be. And he reached for her arm. I can't even finish the sentence. I have been in rooms where men did exactly this. Exactly this. And what Tiffany did next is what I wish every woman had the space to do. She took one step back. She squared her shoulders. She said, "Take your hand off me." He did not. The cleaning cart appeared at the far end of the connecting corridor with a sound that cut through the murmur of the gala. Not loud, but precise. A sound with direction. Everyone in the corridor turned. Some because of the sound, some because of the shift in atmospheric pressure that happens when the weight of a room changes without anyone being able to say exactly why. Mr. Park stood at the corridor entrance with both hands on the cart handle. He did not speak. He removed his cap. He placed it on the cart. He removed his gloves, one, then the other, and set them on the cart handle in a deliberate line. He took off the reading glasses and folded them into the breast pocket of the gray uniform. He reached up and smoothed his hair back with one hand, and the gesture was automatic, practiced. The same gesture she had seen in the audio message thumbnails, the same one as she had read about in a profile piece she'd found once and read 3 times. The security team from the gala's outer perimeter had appeared behind him. They were not blocking him. They were standing slightly behind, and they had inclined their heads. Adrian Vale's grip on her arm loosened, then dropped. The dragon tattoo on the right side of the man's neck was fully visible above the collar of the gray uniform, ascending from collarbone to jaw in black ink, bold-lined and unmistakable. Adrian said, still trying to inhabit some version of the situation he had arrived at, "Who are you?" The man in the gray uniform looked at him with the specific stillness of someone who has already decided the outcome of the next 30 seconds and is simply implementing it. He said, "Let her go." Then when Adrian didn't move, "Kang Do-hyun." The corridor went completely silent. Tiffany stopped breathing. She was looking at the tattoo. She was looking at the jaw, the height, the hands that had set the cleaning gloves on the cart handle with the same deliberate precision she had watched move through her documents for 2 years. She was hearing the voice she knew from 4 transcribed audio messages, from the single direct conversation in her first week, from the specific way it weighted the end of a sentence when the person speaking had already decided what came next. She was looking at Mr. Park. She was looking at Kang Do-hyun. They were the same person. They had always been the same person. The coffee she had put on the kitchenette counter every morning for 3 months. The conversations in the corridor at 4:30 in the afternoon. Everything she had said about her boss, said out loud to her boss without knowing it. Every word. Omo, K-fam. I have watched a lot of reveals in my time. This is a Korean Mafia channel. I've seen some things. But this one does something different. Because it's not just the shock of finding out who he is. It's the inventory that happens in the first 5 seconds after you find out. She's running through everything she said. Everything. The thing about his voice. The thing about how she couldn't stop thinking about him. The thing about how she liked him anyway, out loud, in the corridor, to his face while he cleaned the windows behind her. That's not just a reveal. That's a reckoning. I need you to understand how that feels. Because I do understand how that feels. Finding out that the person you trusted with the unguarded version of yourself knew more than you thought, that hits different than any other kind of reveal. That one goes all the way down. Adrian Vale was removed from the gala quietly. He did not resist. He was too experienced a man in too many rooms to mistake the particular quality of the silence around him for anything other than what it was. The specific silence that means the decision has already been made and the implementation is underway. He was in the elevator within 2 minutes. He would find, over the next week, that his building access credentials had been suspended, that 2 of his pending contracts with Kang Imperial Group had been routed to a review process that showed no signs of concluding, and that his name had quietly stopped appearing on the guest lists of 3 events he had expected to attend. He did not call. He did not send a lawyer. He was a man who had spent enough time in enough rooms to understand that the only reasonable response to some situations was to quietly become smaller. Tiffany was standing at the far end of the corridor. The gala behind her was still producing the sound of a gala, music, conversation, the clink of glass, but it felt very far away. The corridor was mostly empty. The security team had retreated to the perimeter. It was just her and the man in the gray uniform who was her boss, and the man she had fallen in love with separately, and the man who had been cleaning her floor every other day for 3 months. She said, "Was it you?" Not a question. She had the answer. She needed to say the words out loud in his presence so that the reality of the situation had somewhere to land. He said, "Yes, the whole time. Yes, 3 months. Yes," he did not look away. He had the qualities she had noted in her very first week, the capacity to be looked at directly without flinching, and it was present now, fully, even inside a gray janitor's uniform with the cleaning gloves folded on the cart. She laughed. It was not the professional laugh, and it was not the real laugh. It was a third kind, the kind that comes when something is so comprehensively absurd that the body produces laughter because it doesn't know what else to produce. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth for a moment. Then she lowered it. "You heard everything," she said. "Yes, all of it, every word." She looked at him. "Including the part where I said I liked you." He said, "Yes, to you. Yes." She looked at the window for a moment, at the city in the dark, the lights of Manhattan pressing against the glass 50 stories up. Then she said, "You lied to me." He said, "Yes, every day for 3 months." He said, "Yes, I did." She looked back at him. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Not calculating, she had seen him calculate. This was different. This was the specific stillness of a man arriving at a true thing and committing to say it without the architecture of a managed answer around it. He said, "Because I needed to know if you would see me without the building around me. Without the title. Without." He stopped briefly, without any of the things that give people reasons that aren't actually about the person. He looked at her. "I needed to know if you'd offer the janitor coffee the way you'd offer anyone coffee. Or if it was the CEO's floor you were being warmed to." She was quiet. He said, "You offered the coffee before you knew my name," she said. "You still lied." "Yes, that doesn't cancel itself out." "No," he said. "It doesn't." He did not offer her a prettier version of what he had done. He did not reach for justification. He stood with the truth of it, that he had been dishonest, that she had paid the cost of that dishonesty without knowing she was paying it, that her trust had been given to someone who had not been honest about who he was, and he let her look at it without managing it for her. This is important, K-fam. I want you to notice what he did not do. He did not say it was for her own good. He did not explain it away. He did not turn the apology into a speech about himself. He just said, "Yes, it was true, I did it. The reason is this." And then he stopped talking. That matters. In my experience, And I have some experience with men who have done things that needed accounting for. The ones who skip straight to the explanation are usually still protecting themselves. The ones who stop talking after the true statement are usually actually sorry. She stood with it. She looked at him for a long time in the quiet corridor. The gala moving behind the glass at the end of the hall, the city moving beyond the windows. Then she said, "I need some time." He said, "Take what you need." She walked past him down the corridor to the elevator. She pressed the button. She waited. She did not look back. The doors opened. She stepped in. The doors closed. She did not come in early for the next 4 days. She arrived at 9 a.m., which was still before most of the floor, but was not 7:45, and she did not make 2 cups of coffee, and she did not leave a note in the distribution folder. She answered her correspondence correctly and completely. She filed her documents accurately. She attended the 2 meetings scheduled that week and performed in them with the precision that had always defined her in the building, because that precision was not conditional. It was structural. It was who she was, and it was not going to be disrupted by the fact that her world had just rearranged itself. Rosa said on the second day, "Is everything okay?" Tiffany said, "Yes." Rosa said, "Okay." She went back to her desk. She brought Tiffany lunch on Thursday, a sandwich from the place 2 blocks away that Tiffany liked, and left it on the desk without comment and without asking for conversation. On the 4th evening, Kang Do-hyun came to the 38th floor. He was wearing a suit, the dark navy one, no tie, the silver cufflinks. He walked down the empty corridor at 6:20 p.m. with the particular quality he always had of occupying space without requiring it to acknowledge him. He stopped at her desk. He placed the gray janitor's cap on the desk surface. Next to it, he set a small flat box, the kind that held a single object. Inside the box, a key card, matte black, no branding, with a small engraved number, 50. She looked at the cap. She looked at the box. She looked at him. He said, "For 3 years I hid in your corridor. I want to give you access to mine," she said. "That's not an apology," he said. "No. It's a question." She picked up the key card. She held it. She looked at it for a moment, at the black surface and the small engraved 50, and then she looked at him with the expression he had produced in her only once before, in the corridor, as Mr. Park when she had told him he was easy to talk to. The expression that had no professional distance in it. The direct one. She said, "You heard everything I said." "Yes. Every time I said I couldn't stop thinking about him. Every time." She was quiet. "Then, and you never said anything." He said, "I was afraid of what would happen if I did." She said, "You." "Afraid of this." He looked at her. "Of you." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You should have told me." "Yes, I'm still angry. I know." She looked at the key card again. Then she stood up, and she picked up the janitor's cap from the desk, and she walked toward the elevator bank. She tapped the key card against the panel. The elevator. A different one. The private one. The one she had seen only once in 2 years when a board member had used it in her presence, opened with a sound that was somehow quieter than a regular elevator. The way expensive things are always quieter. She stepped in. She turned around. He was still at the desk. She held up the janitor's cap and placed it deliberately on his head. He reached up and adjusted it, which was the first time she had ever seen him make an involuntary movement that was also slightly ridiculous, and she let herself smile. The real one, small and crooked on the left, without trying to stop it. She said, "So you know, Mr. Kang, I liked you in the uniform, too. I liked you when I thought you were nobody." He looked at her with an expression she did not have a name for yet. She said, "Come on, then." He walked to the elevator. The doors stayed open until he was inside. Then they closed, and the floor indicator rose. 38, 39, 40, 41, upward through the building toward the top floor, toward the private office and the security monitor and the manila folder locked in the bottom right drawer. Mark my words, K-fam, and I mean this in the most sincere way I know how to say it. The moment that gets me is not the revelation in the corridor. It's not the cap on his head. It's that she pressed the button and waited for him. She could have gone up alone. She could have made him wait. She waited for him at the door, and that was the whole thing. That was the whole story in one gesture. After everything, the deception, the months of one-sided honesty, the fear, the notes that went unanswered, she stood at the door of the elevator and waited. That's not naivety. That's not forgiveness before it's been earned. That's a woman who knows exactly what she's choosing and is choosing it anyway, because the man who offered coffee to a janitor every morning for 3 months without asking anything in return was the same man who stood in her corridor afraid of being known by her. And she understood something about that. Something about what it costs a person to be afraid of that particular thing. The doors closed. The building held them both, rising. Somewhere on the 38th floor, the corridor was quiet, and the second coffee cup was gone from the kitchenette counter, and the distribution folder sat empty, and in the bottom right drawer of the office on the 40th floor, 13 margin notes waited in a manila folder, in order, the first 11 unanswered, and the last 2 the beginning of something else. He had commanded the invisible. He had chosen to become invisible. And she had seen him in both versions, clearly, and had not looked away from either one. That was the story. That was the whole story. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever said something honest to someone? Truly unguarded, the kind of thing you only say when you think nobody who matters is listening, and later found out they heard every word? Have you ever been seen more clearly by someone in the wrong role than by someone in the right one? Mark my words, K-fam, the person who chose to be invisible to understand you is sometimes the person who already understood you most. Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about hidden identity, forbidden love, and the courage it takes to be chosen for who you really are, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click Join to become a part of our community and help the channel. Progressa p criar diretório e estrutura de arquivos etapa 1, análises de personagens plus sinopse 7-2A, roteiro parte 1, 3x300 palavras, etapa 2B, roteiro parte 2, 3 800 palavras, etapa 2C, roteiro parte 3, 3.800 palavras, etapa 2D, roteiro parte 4, 3.303. 800 palavras, etapa 3. Hook inicial plus CTA, final weight gerando shot list cinematográfica 9, etapa 5. Descrição YouTube, 1 a 40 160 palavras, 10, etapa 6. Prompt de thumbnail cinematográfico 11, consolidar pacote completo e apresentar arquivos pasta de trabalho, Packer 2.01, analise personagens. Mdiker 2H2A, roti, ropate 1 emd, initial 2H2DB, roteropate 4, hawk mdiker 25A, sinus isle hawk. MD Eker 2H05B sinus part 1. MD Eker 205D sinus part 2. MD 205E sinus part 4. MD contexto habilidade 2H narradora 2.